We'll do a review of Likutei Sichos in Chelek Yud Zayin, the Sicha for Tazria and Parshas Hachodesh. The Rebbe discusses the connection when Tazria comes together with Parshas Hachodesh. The Rebbe explains B'chlal the idea of the Hanhogen Nisis, the miraculous conduct of Hashem in the world, and the natural conduct, where the idea of Tazria represents the Avodas HaOdam. That's the natural way. And then you have the Hachodesh, which is Milamaila, which is a miraculous way. And the whole idea is to get to the point where both of these styles of conduct of Hashem, the natural and the supernatural, are all come together, because everything comes really from a higher place in which the natural is also perceived as the supernatural, as the Rebbe goes through in great details the different parts of it. But first, the Rebbe starts off by asking, how is it that Tazria, which represents the service of the person, the Sarusa Dilatata, is connected with Hachodesh? Hachodesh seems to be everything that is coming from above, the conduct of above the Geula, as we'll see inside. Aleph. Tazria Parshas Hachodesh Aleph. Shabbos Parshas Hachodesh is Chal Lipamim. The Shabbos in which we read the portion of Hachodesh is sometimes as it is in this year, Shabbos Parshas Tazria. So it comes in the Shabbos in which we read the portion of Tazria. So everything in Torah we know is accurate. Ali Inyonim from Torah Zayin B'diuk. Everything in Torah are very specific. And when there's two things coming together, is from them Gufa was the Beida Parshas kommen zusammen. For the fact itself that we see these two sections are come together on the same Shabbos, the same Torah reading, is muchach, that is evidence as a that they have amongst themselves a common point that is in both parshas. And the reason why we have to say that, well, if there was no common ground between these two parshas, well, Torah's emes nit mechaber given zusammen. Torah's, the true Torah, which is true, would not have connected them together if there's no connection there. So the Rebbe is going to ask that at first glance, it seems not only are they not the same, but it seems to be that they're actually opposite. They different ideas that are extreme from one the other. At the first glance, it actually appears as it is not only that they don't have a common ground, a common point, but on the contrary, it seems to be items that are opposites one from the other. Parshas Hachodesh wird angerufen als Shem dem Pasuk. Why we call this portion of Hachodesh? This is the based on the first pasuk over there that we read in the parsha. Is Hachodesh Hazel Lachem Reish Chodoshim. This month is the head of the month. As we'll see, the Rebbe will explain the pasuk itself in different ways. But talking about the month of Nisan, we're saying that the month of Nisan is the first, the head of all the months, etc. So what is the month of Nisan? Chodesh Hazel. Chodesh Nisan was in Yoni is Chodesh HaGeula. The month of Nisan, what is the concept of the month of Nisan? It's a month of redemption. Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's the month in which the redemption from Egypt took place. Ve'es kumt in ganzen milmayla. This is the redemption as it comes from above. Kidrashis Razal, as our sages have found, as of them gate koil doidi hinezabo. The pasuk says, behold, the voice of my beloved is, he's coming. So the beloved is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Coming means that the Hamshach is coming from Milamayla. He is coming. Unochmer, At his bo, bizen an oifun fun, his house is coming. In his bo, medalig alahori. Medalig means he is jumping over. Dilug al haketz. That is to overjump the end to bring up, in other words, not to wait for the end to come, but rather to jump in front, ahead of the case. Bisarusa de la'ela, through the arousal of above. That means milamaila. From above comes that hamshocha. Was the far ver the ganze parsha angerufen parsha Hachodesh. Because of this idea that it is the month of Geula, it's a month of redemption. That's why we call the entire portion that we read mostly about the laws of Pesach, it's all called the month, the parsha of Hachodesh. Hagam, as nor ein posik in Onev, it's just one verse in the beginning. For the Kriya from this reading, Red Veg Hachodesh, it talks about the Hachodesh Hazeh, about the Hachodesh. The rest of it on the Ivrik Psukim and the other verses, the rest of the verses, Reiden Veg the Din for Korban Pesach v'chulu, they discuss the laws of the Korban Pesach, etc. So, why is this all connected to Hachodesh? Because Hachodesh represents the month, the idea of redemption. It's the month of redemption, the month of things coming from above. Well, here in the sense, because that is actually the reason that Korban Pesach is al Shem uPasach Harayva Gomer. Why do we call the Korban Pesach? Pesach goes on the based on the fact that Hashem jumped over the houses of the Egyptians when he plagued the firstborn. He jumped over, the house of the Jews, and when he plagued the Egyptians, he jumped over, and that's why we call it the Korban Pesach. Was Vais Eiv der Geula, so that points to the redemption. Was Kum Bedilog, that comes in a way, jumps over in ganze milmayla. The jump over means it comes totally from above. It's like Kol Doidi, the Rebbe said before, Medalig al Hahorim. It comes from milmayla. It jumps over and jumps over all the limitations and goes beyond and brings the Geula in ganze milmayla. But this comes totally from above. Nigla Aleya Melech Malcham Lochem Kadosh Baruch Hu Olam. The king's king, Hachodesh Baruch Hu, revealed himself to the Yidden, and he redeemed them. So this is what Pesach is about. This is the Korban Pesach. This is Pasach Hashem. This is the Diva the Geula. Und das ist der Teuchel von Hachodesh. This is what the content when we say Hachodesh. This month is the Chodesh Nisan. The month of Nisan was the Chodesh HaGeula, which is the month of redemption. So basically, this is a whole month of redemption because it's a month which the approach is the Medaleg Alahorim, when things go beyond the nature. Everything comes from above. It goes in a way, despite that there is limitations, there is ends, there's a gates, but Hashem jumps over on the gates, goes over it. That's the idea of Pesach. That's part of the Hachodesh. That's the month. The month is a month of redemption. So basically, all this points to the fact how things come from above. So that is the Parshas Hachodesh. Now contrast that with the Parshas Tazria. Tazria represents the work of the people below, not as it comes from above. Mashenkin der Teuchen from Tazria, as opposed to the content of the Tazria, which is Loshen Nikeva. This is a feminine language, not Yazria, but Tazria, meaning a Nikeva. The Erzogt Fardem Ishoki. The person says clearly, we're talking about the feminine. Ishoki Sazria. Is with Alter Rebbe, is Mefarish the Maimer, as the Alter Rebbe explains the saying of our sages, that Ish Mazriya Tchila Yeledes Nekeva. If the man is the one that brings first the seed, then they give birth, then she gives birth to Nekeva. But Isha Mazriya is Tchila, as it says in the Pasuk, when the woman brings the seed first. So then Yeled is Zachar. She gives birth to a male. So what does it mean over here? The man first, the woman. Metaphorically, it's talking about Hachodesh Baruch Hu and the Bnei Yisrael. Hachodesh Baruch Hu is sort of the man, the masculine. The Bnei Yisrael are the feminine. So the Alter Rebbe says that when the Ish begins with the Ish, which means it comes from Hashem, then there is a Nekeva. That means that it's not such a stable. The Yisraelis that comes from Maila is not a lasting one because it gives birth to a Nekeva. Over there would be a Daitan Kalas, would mean not stationary, as opposed to Isha Kisazriya. When it starts with the feminine, it starts with the Bnei Yisrael, Knesset Yisrael. When they work hard, that's when they bring down the level of Yolad Zochar, a permanent Yisraelis. As the Alter Rebbe is Mefarish, the Maimer. Ish Mazriyat Chile Yeledes Nekeva. If a man gives the seed for a given Nekeva, Ish Mazriyat Chile Yeledes Zochar, if this woman's seed comes first, you get a male. As Ish V'Isha Zan Merames, that the Ish V'Isha are hinting on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, V'Knes Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. And when Ish Mazriyat Chile, when it starts off with the Ish Mazriyat Chile, the Rebishter is Meir Chile Ayid. If Avodas Hashem, Hashem arouses a Yid to service of Hashem. It comes from Milo. So then the birth, the result of it is birth to a female. The Aveda is Nitkim Bas Kayama. That service is not a sustainable service. As Evinoshim was Daitan Kala. That's just like women whose mind is light. It doesn't stand. It's not strong to stable, and therefore the avodah that comes Ish Mazriya Tchila from Kodesh Baruch Hu does not bring a lasting Yisraelis. When over Ish Mazriya Tchila, however, when the woman is the one that brings the seed first, which means when the service begins from the arousal below, so then Yeled Zachar, then the birth is a male. The Avodah Zabas Kayomo, that service is a lasting one. So we take that in. So what does Tazria mean then? And it's called the Parshas Tazria, talking about the feminine. It's talking about the Avodah Sa'odah. So Parshas Hachodesh is talking about Selus of the Leil, and here we're talking about Tazria, and we're combining these two opposites together in one kriya. Von Parshe Isha Kisazria. So this, according to this interpretation of the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah, so this shows that Isha Kisazria represents Avodah Sa'odah Mitzvah Dilatata, the service of the man be from the arousal below Dafke. Nit v'Hachodesh was not like it comes from above. So how are these things, two things, related together at the same time? In Ois Beis, the Rebbe will reconcile the two Pirushim in Hachodesh Hazeh, the Pirush of the Even Ezra that we're talking about the cycle of the moon versus the cycle of the sun. Hachodesh Hazeh Lochem, this is the cycle of the moon. And this is the first of the cycle of the moon, together with the interpretation of the Medrash that says that Hachodesh Hazeh Lochem means that this is the month in which there is the miracles that take place. Hachodesh Hazeh Lochem, this is the Chiddush, the renewal in the way that is beyond nature. Rebbe is going to connect and say that actually nature, the versus above nature, so that this parsha Hachodesh Hazeh, which talks about the Chiddush beyond nature, it's connected with the level that this is the cycle of the moon, because the moon is not consistent, not a cycle that goes same, but every day it changes. The moon, the size of the moon versus the sun. So basically on the pasuk is expressing the hanhoga, the conduct of miracles, in the way that this is the cycle of the moon. Let's look inside. Base. That this is the month, which is the first of the months. This is the first to you for the month of the year. The Rebbe is going to bring down, there are many interpretations. The Rebbe is going to bring out two interpretations: the simple interpretation and the medrash interpretation. The simple interpretation is the Even Ezra, Aleph. Derech Hapshat, the Even Ezra, is masbir dem inyan fun Hachodesh. He explains the idea of when we say Hachodesh, Unshana, and the idea of year. So here we're talking about Hachodesh Hazeh. This is the cycle of the moon. This is the cycle of the moon, which is the Rosh Chodoshim for the moon. And it's different, the cycle of the moon, than the cycle of the sun, because in the moon, there is no year. 12 cycles doesn't necessarily make a year, doesn't make a year. The same thing, a year doesn't get divided into 12 parts. So these are basically two separate calculations. One goes by the month, which is the circle of the moon. The cycle of the moon has no connection to the year. It's it totally cycles in of itself. There's not anything that happens that with the cycles to represent a year. And then you have the cycle of the sun, which has nothing to do with the parts of the moon. The pasuk says, Hachodesh is a lochem of the cycles of the months. The month of Nisan is the first one. So Aderech Hapshat, the Rebbe Ezra is masbir dem inyan for Hachodesh and Shana. Explain like this: Mitzad mahalach halavono, as the cycle of the moon is bechlal nitod der geder from Shana. There at all, there's no definition. There's no year. No such as a year. A year we know is the 4 seasons. So there's no such a year there. Ein levana Shana klal. The levana, as it cycles by itself, has no year. While in them sibuv halevana is kentig nor der uptel from Chodoshim. In the cycle of the moon, all what you can see is a cycle of 29. Yad Hachodesh chavtes yom v'chatzi, 29 and a half days. Ubeis yodesh shos, 2 parts of an hour. V'ayin gimel chalokim, 73 chalokim. That's a complete cycle that takes place from the that's the end. So every month, kumt for a fuller sibuv from the levana, that brings about a complete cycling of the levana. Gam benegei lematzev hachamo v'yachas la'aretz, even as the sun standing relative to the earth at the place, it does just keeps on making that circle. It doesn't matter where the sun is relative to the earth. That still cycles itself. And then it comes the birth, the new Levana once again. It's totally different of the what's going on with the cycle of the sun. The moon does its own cycle. It says aber nito in the mahalach halavona kein prat was all uptail in your from zweiten. But there is nothing in the cycle of the moon. There's no aspect. There's not a detail that should separate it one year from the other year. Nothing happens over there to say that this is a different year. It's just a 29 and a half plus cycle over there, but it doesn't divide itself in what time of the year or what time of the season it is. Basically, it's a cycle of a lunar cycle, the moon cycles in of itself, totally independent or ignorant of anything that's going on in the other cycles of the sun around the earth, which makes the year. The Idach Gisa, on the other hand, Mitzad HaShemesh is nitoh der Sug Hazman von Chadoshim. In the sun perspective, there is no category of time of month. There's nothing broken up into parts. Ein l'shemesh chodesh klal. The shemesh has no month at all. The sibuv hashnosi from shemesh, what is the yearly cycle of the sun? Is shin samachay yom b'sheishois be'erech. It's approximately 365 days and 6 hours, approximately. Und der sibuv seine, and in this cycling of the sun, is be'ofen, is in a way, it cycles in a way that it brings about different seasons depending on the closeness and the distance of the sun to the earth. As a shafti dalet kufis hashana, that this creates the 4 periods, the 4 different seasons of the year. Aber, but that's as far as the seasons go. It goes 365 days. Aber in Zay Mahalach is nitokim prat, but in its cycle, there is no aspect of it. There's no detail. That should create the boundaries of these months. So what is the Pasuk telling us? Und der Pasuk, Hachodesh hazel lochem, that to you, the Pasuk is saying, this cycle for you is the Reish Chadoshim. We're talking about here, this is the beginning of all the cycles. There is Chodoshim, there is cycles. But this is for the Yid, this is the head, the starting, the beginning of the cycles. So we're talking about counting of the month. So you have the months that follow. So what is the head? What is the first month? That first cycle is the month of Nisan. This cycle is the first. Which connects to a year of the Levana. As the Chazal say, we counted Levana. So what is the first cycle as it relates to the number of cycles, which is the cycles of the moon year? As I say, this all begins with the first month, which is the month of Nisan. So basically, Nisan is the time when we start the cycle of the moon. Mash'enken the Rosh Hashanah l'shanim, as opposed to what is the first day, what is the Rosh Hashanah? For years, was the Shaykh Shemesh, the year belongs to the sun, is from Tishrei. That's on Tishrei. So Tishrei, we have the cycle beginning, representing the beginning of the cycle of the sun that begins at Tishrei, and the beginning of the cycles of the moon begin